Can everyone hear me okay? A little closer. How's that? Oh, I pulled the microphones. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you so much for that prayer to bring us all into space here. Okay, I'm gonna hold this. Thank you all so much for being here today. I will admit that I'm nervous. And yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be able to have this opportunity to speak with community about what's been going on for Veronica and I in this past year. It's been a year, yeah. Structure of today is first we're just going to speak about ourselves, why we have chosen to join the steering committee of the Natural Medicine Health Act, and what it's been like for us. And then we're going to move into, I think, do we want to do questions? Yeah, so we're going to, in the middle of our talk, take on a few, maybe like 5 or so questions, specific questions that people have about the initiative, and we'll answer to our abilities. Please remember that we are not politicians, and we are not lawyers, so we'll answer it to the best of our ability as community members that are sitting on the steering committee. And then after that, we're going to talk about, what are ways that we can potentially organize in the event that this does pass. In the event that we do have the Natural Medicine Health Act here in Colorado, what are ways that community can actually be empowered? Is that a possibility? So it's going to be the structure of today. And I'm going to give it to Dee, if you want to start just talking about how it's been feeling. Or maybe do you want to start with why you chose to be on the steering committee?
So this has been a hell of an undertaking for me. I never saw myself working in this arena. I am a therapist, essentially, as my day job, has been for nearly 10 years. What I do during the day is I sit with people through some of the worst traumas that they have ever experienced and help them find their strength again, help them find a new life. And that's what I do during the day. I have 5 children, and that's what I do during the rest of my day. So coming home and doing this was not something I foresaw. I sat in a ayahuasca ceremony, and that opened a door that led to another door, that led to another door. And I got this calling to be here. This has not been easy. I've learned more about myself this past year than I have in a long time, and I've been through some shit in my life. It is why I'm so passionate about helping people move through their trauma, because I have lived experience. I have been through my own trauma in a lot of different areas. And that's given me the compassion and the ability, the gift of being an empath, to help people move through their things. Discovering psychedelics, discovering mushrooms was a huge door for me, because being able to learn and practice through neuropsychology, through Gestalt therapy, among other things, was huge. But the psychedelics took it to a completely different level. To me, psychedelics are about connection to the bigger things in life, connection to the bigger whole, and the deeper connection with yourself, including the things about ourselves that we don't want to see. And a lot of times that's where the healing really comes from. I did not expect what I have seen in community on many fronts. I did not expect to be hurt in the way that I've been hurt. Recognizing that I was fairly new to community when I was asked to join this path, knowing that that's where it comes from. Humans have a hard time with change. and humans do not like the unknown. And I think that that's where a lot of frustrations have arisen over the past years. There are a lot of unknowns here. Mushrooms have been out of the picture for 50 plus years. That's a couple generations. It's been alive, kept alive in indigenous communities, but indigenous communities are relatively small. And there are more and more people that are going back to the ancient wisdom, which is huge, which is another reason that why we're here. I do believe in my heart of hearts that Maria Sabina knew exactly what she was doing. She was a very powerful shaman, extremely wise, and she knew what she was doing when she gave this medicine to the white man. Because everyone needs to heal. We focus a lot of our work on healing the victim, that sometimes we forget that if we're not also offering healing to the bully, to the perpetrator, we can heal the victim, but then the bully goes out and makes more victims. We really need to, my belief, we really need to allow people of all creeds, of all races, of all times, of all opinions, of all political backgrounds, to be able to come to their own understanding. That we are very, very quick to judge as humans. It's how we're wired. We have our belief systems, we have our value systems, information comes in, it passes through these filters, and we assign a judgment, we assign a label, and we move into that paradigm of what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad. And a lot of pain can come from the enforcement of our beliefs and our truth of what is good and what is bad. And an old saying is, what is good for the spider is not good for the fly. What is good for the sheep is not good for the wolf. And all these things were created. All things are created. They're all necessary. This is a massive ecosystem, and we all need each other. The animal kingdom needs each other, and all we really need to do is look to nature. It grows, it dies, it thrives, it grows, it dies, it thrives. So this has been challenging, and I'm hoping, we even got a rainbow coming in, ancient symbol of hope, that we can reach some clarity, that we can look at the triggers and the fears that we have and start looking at what we're really perpetuating. Are we sharing fear? Are we sharing strength? Are we sharing pain? Are we sharing wisdom? What are we bringing and what are we putting out? Because when we can put out faith, when we can reach in for our own inner knowing that we will be okay. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced pain and suffering at one point in time or another. And you're still here. You're still okay. You're still finding yourselves. You're still growing. I look at this room and I see people who care. I see people with hearts. You wouldn't show up on a Wednesday night to ask questions if you didn't care, if you didn't want to learn, if you didn't have hope, and you didn't have a desire to see things get better. That is my desire too. I was called to this work. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like it was a choice, because I have learned in the past that when I'm called, I better show up. Things don't work out too well when I don't show up. So I am here. I am doing the best that I can. I want to be the bridge to the people that I am working with who do not have the same understanding as you guys have. That's why it's the community. It's why it's the ecosystem. And when there are concerns that are brought to me, I take them straight to the people that I work with. Every time. When you talk to me, you would know that. So please, I am here. Talk to me. Please. That is what I'm asking for. Talk to me. Ask questions. Get to know me. I'm a human being doing the best that I can, just like each and every one of you. And I am asking for your kindness and your compassion, your forgiveness if I trigger you, and also your knowing that if you are triggered, that is something to look at inside. I have finally gotten to the point where I'm more grateful for the triggers that I have received this past year, because it has caused me to grow exponentially. It has shown me my weaknesses, It has shown me the areas of my shadow that I have not addressed, my fear of persecution, my fear of judgment, and at the base of it, I want people to like me. I don't want to be not liked. I think that's something that most people want, is we don't like it when other people don't like us. And when it's justified because we did something, and we know we did something, and somebody doesn't like us, that's one thing. But when there's not questions asked, when there's no getting to know each other, when there's no reaching out to learn, that hurts. So that's what I'm asking for tonight.
Lucky me.
Thank you, babe. Do you think y'all can give that to me? Can give that to us? Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Man, I don't know how to follow that. Thank you so much for that, for your honesty and transparency. Yeah, I think I'm gonna start with, yeah, I'm a human being. I'm a human being who's had a lot of experiences. And I've been working in this movement for almost 10 years now. And I'm also, thank you so much. Thank you.
Plant medicine.
And I'm also a cultural and a medical anthropologist, and I've been researching this space and the community that has come about in this movement for about 6 years. And I've learned a lot and I've observed a lot. And so when I ask myself, why have I come onto the steering committee of the Natural Medicine Health Act, those are the things that inform that decision. And I think something that Veronica and I spoke about is that next to no one, maybe one or two people asked us why we joined the steering committee. And the people who didn't ask, and not the people, but there was a lot of assumptions around why we were on this steering committee. And so that's what I'm really excited for tonight, is to be able to share with this beautiful group of people, why we joined and what has happened since we joined. And so I joined because, I was attending the town halls that were happening since July and then October. And the way I saw it is that new approach is here in Colorado, whether we like it or not. And we can fight that, and I honor the fight, and I respect those who are fighting in it. And I felt where my expertise were best put was inside the steering committee. And I felt that I would be able to, if I could make an impact, it would be there. And I remember people, thinking that I was naive and thinking that it wouldn't work and that I'd be tokenized, and sure, that's possible. But I also remember when the script came out for Landslide and for the canvassers, what Veronica and I and Sean and Kevin did, to make sure that was changed. Because we're not happy with how that happened. And I'm going to say I'm still not happy with how that went down, and I don't think that I feel that enough had changed in that. But I know that an honest effort was made from both of us. And that's just one example. And I know that Veronica, as the co-petitioner, has probably had a lot more impact on this than I have. I sit on one meeting every 2 weeks. And a lot of what I have done is bringing a lot of that internal, the conversation that's happening in a small circle on these steering committee calls and brought it to members of community and let members of community know what's going on, because I want to be a bridge. I want transparency. I want an opportunity. I want the community to have an opportunity to know what's happening before it happens as much as I could. And so that's why I joined. And, you know, why do I continue to stay on is also an interesting question. Because there have been a lot of moments where I'm just like, why am I doing this? This is hard. It's hard to be in community and to have people constantly questioning me and underestimating like my ability to make this decision. And like question my own integrity. Like I know that I'm in my integrity. And I know that others are too. Everyone's got their own integrity, you know. And so I'd like come to community events and like deal with just like hurt people hurting people. And I see that our community is hurt. I see that. And I'd have to like hold it and I'd have to like bear that on my shoulders. And I'm just like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? And it's because I believe that, man, if I'm not on that board, like what's gonna happen? And especially moving forward. You know, there's been a lot that I haven't had control over. And as I mentioned, one of the things we'll be talking about tonight is the potential for implementation, if that ends up being the case. And that's really what I'm concerned about, is what implementation will look like. And so, yeah, I'm just like, I don't really want this. It's not fun, and it's not fun being in community, and it's not fun being on the steering committee either. Like, none of it has been that fun. And I believe that I'm doing what's on what my path has been laid in front of me. And every morning I ask myself, am I in my integrity? And when the answer is yes, I continue. And when the answer is no, I do something about it. And I have my people, you know, who support me and who are there to hold me accountable if I'm not in my integrity. So that's the first question, you know, about how it's been for us and why we joined the steering committee in the first place. Did you want to talk at all about how it's been for you as a woman of color, as an Indigenous woman, and of mixed heritage, you know, being in this role?
Hard.
I'm sorry.
I sit with steering committees with, it's primarily white people. And I talk from a different perspective. And sometimes I'm looked at like I'm nuts. And I have to figure out how to navigate that, how to present what I know, what I have learned, what I see to be important in such a way that it is digestible to people who have no idea. If you're not a woman, you don't know what it's like to be a woman. You can conceptualize it, but you don't. If you're not a person of color, you can conceptualize it, but you don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a white woman. But then when I come into community, there's been some really, really uncool things from community members that have been said to me and from my own people that has been said to me. A feeling of no matter what I say or what I do, it's not good enough. I'm not white enough to be white. I'm not native enough to be native. It's been tough. But I believe that the reason why I'm of mixed Indigenous heritage is because that allows me to be a bridge. It makes me sad when I see people of color shaming white people. It does. Because this needs to stop. People of color know what it's like to be judged for the color of their skin. And when I see them judging people for the color of their skin, it has to stop. Pain is pain. I understand that. I have endured racism. I have been beaten because I was the wrong color in the wrong place, physically abused, cracked ribs kind of thing. I know what it is. And I go into different Indigenous communities, and they're different Indigenous communities, different tribes, different customs, different understandings, different beliefs. There are some that don't want this. There are others that do. There are others that are ambivalent. So it does come to a choice. But that is why I ask for grace. That's why I ask for grace for us. That's why I ask for grace for the people that we work with, the new approach people, the other people on the steering committee, because you don't know what you don't know. And I can say that for the most part, these people have been open and receptive. Sometimes I gotta argue with them. Sometimes I gotta dig my heels in, but that's why I'm there, to be able to bring a different perspective in, to hold accountability, because they don't know what they don't know. That's why I'm here. How about for you?
Yeah. Well, some of you here may know that taking on the identity of a woman of color has been new for me upon coming to the U.S. It just was never put on me when I lived in Montreal. And it's been really an interesting journey. And there have been people who have really helped me understand the ways that I have been silenced as a woman, as a person of color, that I didn't know was happening. And it was really like uncomfortable for me to accept and to admit and to say that I'm being silenced as a woman of color. Because I never lived that identity before. But some people really helped me in seeing that that was happening in multiple spaces. And so it happened, you know, like within community, and it happened in ways on the steering committee as well. And I don't know if it was as clearly, oh, because you're a woman of color, you know, it could also be like, well, you're just a community member, so whatever. And there have been times, you know, where I offered suggestions and then they weren't taken, and yeah, it's just it's exhausting. To constantly have to explain myself and remind people, no, actually, like, I'm really intelligent and I have an ability to make that decision on my own, and to explain myself. Where sometimes I'd wonder, like, if people keep questioning me if I was a white male, I don't know, maybe not the same. Maybe would they be silencing me? Would I have as much of a voice? And I also just want to, I didn't get a chance to say thank you so much to the Psychedelic Club for giving us this stage tonight, to have this opportunity to speak our truth as to like how intense this has been for us. And then it's furthermore like just exhausting to have the burden of having to explain to people what they're doing in silencing us or in questioning us. And like that takes a lot of energy to sit down and be like, well, this is how it happened. And, you know, and I'm here for us learning together. And it's like, how much more do I do that? You know? And so far it's been beneficial, so far it's been helpful to have those conversations with people. And what I'm trying to say is I can only imagine what it's been like for people who have always known that they were being silenced for being people of color or women, period. And I did not know that up until recently. And I'm exhausted. So I can only imagine what it's been like for people who have been knowing this, that this has been happening to them. So
And I actually think that this is a good measure. There was so much community input in it. There was so many things in there that I would have never thought of to put in this measure. Could it be better? Of course. I don't think there's such a thing as perfect legislation. I don't. To me, personally, I've studied humans and their behavior since I could remember, because I figured if I could figure out why people do what they do, I could protect myself, which I needed to do growing up. And yeah, capitalism is real. It's very real, and it's very harmful. There's a reason government and federal whatever don't study anything to the extent that this is being studied if they don't see money in it. To me, I see the wave coming. Federal regulation, where they're gonna clamp down and these are the rules and this is how it works and it's gonna be medicalized. And to have the opportunity to create a legislation that's not gonna go down the way that cannabis went down, that isn't gonna push out the mom and pops, that has provisions in it for equity to make sure that they're looking at the impact of indigenous culture every single year, to be able to make recommendations, to create advisory board, because yeah, Dora's Dora. Dora's Dora. It's government. But to have an advisory board where it is explicit that there are people on there that have experience with psychedelics, not just, oh, I've researched it, so I think I know what it is. Again, I can conceptualize, but I've never actually experienced it. People on the steering committee that have indigenous wisdom, that are wisdom keepers. They understand the cultural impact, where it comes from, the religion of it as well. I think that's a really big deal, because if I know something is coming and I can't stop it, I want to do everything I can to at least guide it, to at least do what I can. Because I learned a long time ago that focusing on the things that I cannot prevent just drives me nuts and puts me into a state of fear and terror and helplessness and anger and rage, because I can't do anything about it. So I have to focus on what I can do. This measure takes into account people that are still in the realm of, I need the professional in order to feel safe. Because of the work that I do, I have met a lot of people from all over the place, all socioeconomic backgrounds, religions, people from all over the world. And there are a lot of them that are still afraid. They want to be able to step up to this medicine, but going to a healing center and seeing a licensed professional allows them to feel safe. However, there is also a large part of the population that has experience with this, knows, doesn't need that, has been harmed by that side, that wants nothing to do with those licenses. And they deserve also to be able to use this medicine in the way that they want to use it. I see that in this measure. Is there going to be work to be done? Yes, and that's why we're putting aside part of this opportunity that we have with the Psychedelic Club to ask you guys for input. Every one of you has different lived experiences. You're going to come up with questions or thoughts or potential problems that I can't, that Jazz can't, that the people on the steering committee might not be able to. We need that. You know, I heard the term infighting. I haven't been fighting. I haven't. I have not said anything about this other measure. If anything, what I have said is sign for both, vote for both. The moment I found they could stand together, let's do it. Because if there's an opportunity to let everyone have it the way that their system of beliefs supports, why not? Of course, let's do it. Let's support each other. Let's get back together. Let's put some of our differences aside. Let's figure it out. Because if this measure doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. I'm okay with that, because whatever Spirit says, Spirit says. Learned that a long time ago, and I think a lot of you have too. If it does, we've got some shit to figure out. And you are the medicine people. You are critical to being able to guide this. But you can't help guide it when you're not there, when you're opposed, when you're angry. We need you. It's important. This has two branches. Regulated for the people that need regulations, unregulated for the people that don't want regulations. I think personally, my belief personally, is that is a beautiful thing that is unique. There needs to be accountability, there needs to be growth, there needs to be awareness, there needs to be the hard questions. It's important, and it's imperative to be able to make this work, because it's not going to be perfect. It's new. Anything that we do for the first time is new. There's going to be failures, and we're going to learn from those failures, and we're going to move forward. Fearing change isn't going to help us, guys. Change is coming with or without this measure, either. So we need to figure it out, and we need to do it together. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, so let's talk about the measure a little bit more. I think I saw the community impact on that firsthand. I saw hundreds of comments on the draft, and I synthesized those comments myself, and others did in this room too. And I would say like at least 90% of it was included and edited into the draft, which is like, as far as legislation goes and policy, I mean, I don't know much about it, but like from what I hear, that's not usually how things go. And yeah, for sure, there were a lot of mistakes that were made on the new approach side. And again, I'd like to just reiterate that I'm here representing myself as an individual and not representing anybody else, anybody that I work with. Yes, I work with them, and I acknowledge that, and I take that as a responsibility that I've taken on. But yeah, I definitely saw a lot of impact. If we looked at the first draft that went through, it looked very different than what ended up passing, or not passing, being submitted. And Sean, who's here, worked really hard on it, and I honor you and the work that you put into that initiative. And so the way it works, from my understanding and upon speaking with the other lawyers, is that if it were to pass, decriminalization of personal use, and we'll discuss what we mean by decriminalization, would go into effect almost immediately, I think like a week or two. And so that includes, there's like a long list, and there's some initiatives that have been here. It would be the 109 section, so 107 something 109, where it talks about the personal use section. And it allows for the amount necessary for people to possess, transport, grow, gift, and all kinds of other words, things that are in there, verbs. It also allows for people to exchange bona fide services, which that's something that we get to determine in the implementation phase. Bona fide services like community services, spiritual services, where you can exchange the medicine. You can gift the medicine, and you can also provide harm reduction services, spiritual services, and you can receive financial compensation for those services. But as long as the medicine is being gifted, that would be allowed if we read the language. And of course, course, there's a lot of questions in that, and the questions are all to be determined once, if it passes, and who is in charge of implementation. And I'm going to give you, just before we get into that, like, that could be me
Me?
or Veronica. We're going to take questions in a little bit. So yeah, there's a lot to be figured out in that, and I think we need to do that together, because we definitely don't want somebody else doing that. And then if it were to pass, so that goes into effect, and then 2 years later, and within those 2 years, DORA and the advisory board will be developing the regulated access model or program. And they'll be determining what those laws look like. Who gets to be a facilitator? Who gets to open a healing center? How many hours of training do you have to undergo in order to be a facilitator? In fact, we're seeing a lot of this happening in Oregon right now, and we're watching it. I'm watching it very closely, and I'm learning from it. And in those 2 years, they developed these regulations. And then in, I guess 2024, sometime then, is when healing centers would start opening, I believe. Things are happening differently in Oregon right now. It's taking some time for people to get trained, but this is what the measure says. And then in 2026, there is an opportunity or an option for, and so that would be for psilocybin. And in 2026, there would be an option for healing centers to start opening up around ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline, not including peyote. So that's the initiative, kind of, 30,000 foot scale. There's also a ton of civil protections that have been put in place. So for example, if you're on parole and you get caught with any of these substances, it's not reason to take you off of parole. If you are requesting to have custody of your child, it's not reason to say that you're not eligible for that. I think there's transparent, there's so many civil protections involved that we can get into more deeply. I don't know if you want to share more, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then you can also, if you have anything on your record for having had these substances, and you can apply to the courts at no cost to get that expunged from your record. And so those are things that weren't included in cannabis. And those were things that we learned from, that the people on the steering committee learned from, that the people in this community here learned from, and made sure that that was added into the measure. And so, yeah, there's definitely still things that need to be explored and figured out, and that's why I'm here. And so that we can, in the event that this does pass, that it's not some government body that's deciding what implementation looks like. And anyways, we'll talk more about that, but this is the section on the measure, and I'll let V talk, and then we'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll transition into, I'll cut the questions at a certain point, and then we'll transition into like my ideas of what potential implementation could look like.
Actually, if it's okay with you, I feel the restlessness of the need to ask questions, so if we want to move into that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, questions?
We can do that.
Yeah, if you could go to the mic so that everybody can hear you, that would be awesome. So, who has questions?
Thank you guys.
Gotta do the shuffle. Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Check. All right. Yes, thank you both so much. I appreciate you guys coming to talk today. I've just been reading through this a good bit, listening to what you guys say. And I have a number of questions, but I narrowed it down to one. It seems that, I guess the setup of this is that you'd have the healing centers that are for profit. They would sell them, and they'd be basically the source for, I guess, the facilitators who get it. like, I obviously haven't not enough time to fully understand it, but I don't think like I, for example, can just go buy it on my own. But I guess my question is, to your point, Veronica, about capitalism kind of being uh, quite a debate among many people. Wouldn't you argue that maybe allow these healing centers being for profit is kind of a capitalistic approach to this proposition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that facilitators should make money. And some people want to be above ground. Some people want to be a therapist in a center offering this to people who understand healing in that way. As a medical anthropologist, I studied a lot around how the biomedical system that we live in the Western world is very much a culturally specific way of understanding healing. Where like we gotta go to the doctor needs to tell us what our diagnosis is, and then they give us a pill, and then like it's kind of better, but then it's not. Because if you get off the pill, then it's kind of, and then it comes back. And a lot of people understand healing in that way. Like my mom understands healing in that way, right? She doesn't want to go to somebody who's been growing their mushrooms and has a relationship with their mushrooms and has been guiding people this whole time, or an indigenous like curandero or something like that. And so I hear what you're saying, and yes, it does support the capitalist system. And I believe, the reason why I think that this language is pretty cool is because it actually does provide access to so many people that currently don't have access, that currently don't know a person who's growing mushrooms, and don't know somebody who can guide for them. That's my argument for that argument. I'm not arguing.
My personal understanding is that the system, the capitalistic system, is dying. Too many people are waking up, too many people are saying it for what it is, and too many people are starting to make a shift. It's by no means dead, but there is some significant problems with it. This was taken into account and discussed at length within this, which is why there are provisions in there that this can't be an extraordinary cost. Licenses can't be an extraordinary cost. That, to me, and it can't, I don't know which community member suggested it, but like, I thank you to the bottom of my heart, because to me it was brilliant. It caps it at 5 healing centers. So it can't be like the native roots cannabis where they come in and they're all over the state. You get 5 for the state. And it's still not a selling mushrooms kind of organization. It is still within you are providing a service. With that service comes the mushrooms as part of it, but you're not going to buy mushrooms. Harm reduction services, therapy.
Grow mushrooms.
You can grow the mushrooms. So it was taken into account that you can't stop capitalism, but we can do what we saw possible to limit it as much as we could. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it raises more as well. It seems like now it's creating an oligopoly. If you can only allow 5, then you have to have a whole process now to oversee those 5.
Yeah.
I think to your point earlier, you mentioned that you guys had kind of taken into account what happened with the marijuana industry, and I think it's definitely a different approach to allow 5, but
It's different, and well, it's 5 per entity.
per entity.
Per entity, yeah. So like if you want to open up a healing center, you can only open 5. But then if she wants to open up a healing center,
I
she can open
see.
5. But like you're not allowed to open like 100.
Yeah.
Big business can't come
Stops
in
me
and
at 5.
open 50 statewide.
I see.
So it limits the amount of money even that people can make, and that's the hard thing, because you can't write a legislation where only certain people can make money and wealthy people can't make more money. It's just not something that's doable.
Yeah.
I want to leave space for other people to ask questions, and thank you so much. And we'll be here after if you have more questions.
Yes. We are here, we're gonna be here for a little bit.
Yeah, great question, thank you. Anybody else has questions?
Next question.
Yeah, come on up. Well, we'll take that person and then.
Thank you so much for presenting. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. I'm a little behind on all this. Like I literally just more or less heard about it like a week ago. I got a message from Vita, the psychedelic club was pushing this, and I was like, heck yeah, this sounds really great. So I'm definitely behind, so I'm not sure exactly what this initiative is. So if you can go over like what this initiative actually is and like what substances are allowed, what's like the framework, and what makes it different or similar to other legislation like in Oregon, for example. And also, a second follow-up to that, I'm a little confused to why it's kind of like set up in opposition to Initiative 61. So yeah, those are three points.
Yeah, so I went over it, I guess, a little too much in detail, but essentially what it does is it decriminalizes personal use, which allows gifting and gathering and growing. And then it creates a regulated access model, which is through clinics. And then it also allows people to expunge their record of anything that has, that had this initiative been in place at the time that they got that put on the record, it would be if they can apply to get it expunged. Then the question of the opposition to 61, I don't want to answer that question because, well, first of all, it wasn't created in opposition to 61. 61 was a community-led initiative that came up as an answer to things that the community was not happy with in terms of 58. And so that's basically what it is. I would, yeah.
And go into like what substances are allowed? Like are they just purely psychedelic?
Yeah, so it's natural medicines that include psilocybin, ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline, not including peyote.
I'm sorry.
And the question's been asked before, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it just in case it's being asked in anybody's head. Peyote was not included because a majority of Indigenous voices specifically asked that it wasn't, and it was in response to honor those Indigenous voices.
And last question. Sorry. Why not including more substances? Like I feel like that psychedelics tends to be more of a classism sort of thing. Like when there are a bunch of poor people that are getting over policed for things that we don't find as palpable, like methamphetamine, for example. Like why not include more substances in this and just?
I'm with you. Do you want to write the initiative? Because I'm here for it.
That was discussed too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely would like that. And I think the way that this movement is moving is one step at a time. And it's really hard to rewrite narratives, cultural narratives that are deeply ingrained. And I would also like to say, I forgot to say that I sat in on a focus group for Colorado Springs where they were like testing what people would respond to. Like, hey, if we said this, would you vote yes? And if we said this, like, would you vote yes? And I was so shocked at like how little people know about psychedelics that like as soon as we start talking about personal use, they're like, no way, I would not vote for that. Like, we can't have this like available to people. And then I'm like, wow, I really am in an echo chamber because like I don't know anybody who would say that here in Denver, but like Colorado's big. And Colorado's got a lot of people who aren't in this room. And so like that to me was a big wake-up call. And so just to get back to your question, like that's also why we're starting with plant medicines, is because imagine we were saying we're legalizing all, all substances, and it's an uphill battle, and we've seen it in Portugal, decriminalization, and it's in Oregon as well. However, the way that they did it in Oregon is not actually decriminalization. You can still get fined for having any of these substances, or you go, I believe it's, you have to go to like a clinic for a certain amount of hours, like to get taught how not to use these substances and things like that. So it's not like full decriminalization in Oregon either. But anyways, I digress, and I'd like to take this gentleman's question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I apologize for
Thank you. No, you're great. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. I actually have one quick thing before I take that question, sorry. I would like you to ask yourself how many people you have spoken to outside of your basic community, your family, and your immediate connections about this, what they think, what they would be willing to vote for. I've been asking that question recently, and the majority of the people I've talked to haven't done too much of that dialogue. Since last year, I have talked to over like my own little poll, because I'm a little scientist, I like to do my experiments, a few hundred people, mostly Uber drivers, wait staff, working class. And I have found that our opinion in like the psychedelic clubs and things like that is the minority. A lot of people don't even know what psilocybin is, mushrooms is, a large part of it. This is a very bad drug. A big part of them, absolutely no on the personal use, regulated models.
But then when we say like, oh, well, this is to fight big pharma, you know, and like to give an alternative to SSRIs, which is like such a, like a fraction of the actual argument, but we really simplified it for these people in this focus group, then they're just like, oh, yeah, like, we don't like big pharma, like, we want a regulated access model, and they're just like, what side are you on? I don't understand. But, you know, and it was so conflicting to watch those, like, these people in this focus group, like, just really not understand the value of personal use. We spoke about the indigenous heritage of these uses, and like, their responses were just horrible and very ignorant on how these substances have been used. And so, like, that was really shocking to me, because I've been in this space for so long, and I'm like, everybody knows that.
Yeah.
We don't.
So I'd like to invite you to talk to people outside your sphere, so you can kind of get a feel for the other side, the other half. So, thank you. Next question.
Yes. I don't know.
What's up? Hey. Hey. Uh, there's so many places and snags that I feel like we get on and being able to have dialogue. And so there's so many to, I think, to focus on, to start to kind of compose and open up to look at some areas where there are gaps in the conversation, so we're not actually able to like meet and have like a coherent, like, okay, look, this is a dialogue, we are sharing good information and increasing our collective understanding of what the fuck's really going on and how to be best responsive and responsible. And so just one of the many snags that I see is too much emphasis on policy analysis, and not nearly enough on the power analysis. Not nearly enough. And that's a much more complex, challenging conversation, and it implicates the policy. So it needs to proceed, it needs to be prioritized over like what's in the language, because when it comes to implementation, who has the power to actually develop the departments and determine what policy looks like and have the ears of lawmakers. That's the conversation. And there's many other conversations for sure, but I think when it's much more important than what's in this act, because it will affect what this actually means. So to my friends, Michael, questions, concerns about capitalism. First, I'm gonna set real quick. I'm a context setter, so before I ask this question, I'm just gonna hold the mic for a second. Not too long, I promise.
I will stop you.
Please. The capitalism isn't the only way that we are able to generate wealth and get fed and pay people. Cooperatives, different ways of organizing and building equity have existed long before capitalism. There's a whole thorough way to structure economics that are so totally viable that allow for profiting, but mitigate profiteering. So when we're talking about equity, oftentimes we're talking about access, which is really problematic because it's such a small kernel. It's kind of crumbs. Because in capitalists, generally, when they talk about equity, they talk about shared ownership. And we should really figure out how to distribute the ability to steward what medicine stewardship will look like, and to ensure that the most responsible people, which aren't necessarily the most politically savvy, are the people that have the most money or the most, developed and powerful in the current, medical profit systems that we have in place, to be the most responsible stewards for the people. That, I believe, this is an ideology maybe, that the people who work with the medicine in their communities know best what's needed to know. So in the whole process in developing the language, the 90% or however much was actually included from community input, one, I just want to name that it has to be named that the people pressure and that oppositional force is what has refined this up to this point, and that pressure will continue to refine it. That's how you make diamonds. That refinement, to be in the struggle. It's important to have the struggle. It's important that not everyone is just like, yes, let's do this, because we would have what y'all entered this space to try to thwart and to try to shape. We're just, we got different angles. The biggest thing in the whole process in my coalition trying to influence and make sure that just basic protections were in place for the people if profit models were going to be set up, the most important thing was decriminalization. And the fight, and it was this hard line largely that people in my coalition told me, was that there were no limits, that grow, gather, gift, that we, our sovereignty to be able to steward and produce medicine for ourselves and each other in community, that was our right, and that needs to be reclaimed first before profit models are established. That's been a strong principle in the grassroots community here since the program of mushrooms in 2019. The personal use section in here, so my question is two-part. The personal use section says the necessary amount. If y'all will look to your packets, could you flip through it? What's the section?
Page 12.
Page 12. Whoever's got the section first, shout it out.
It's 109.
108.
108. Yeah, so page 12 is where 109 starts, but then if you flip to 13 and you see section C, number 2, I don't know how you actually, yeah, you get it, you'll find it. It says, for the purpose of Article 170, personal use means the personal ingestion, use, yada, yada. A person may cultivate or possess, includes the amount a person may cultivate or possess of natural medicine necessary to share natural medicines with other persons 21 years of age or older within the context of counseling, all the rest. So there's been a lot of focus on that part. So yeah. To make sure, what that personal rights are protected, it will be a struggle to determine what necessary actually means. That will be interpreted at some point. People who know far better than me about policy law have told me that courts likely, perhaps DORA, although that's been disputed from NMHA folks, will determine what that means. Maybe the people determine what that means if there's enough pressure. So my question is, as this stands, as the policy stands with the power analysis, because the one threat to capitalism is community sovereignty. If you don't need the profit models, if we can grow our own, there's not as much of a demand for the health centers. And by the way, 5 health centers in Colorado is still a lot for a state. It's a lot of health centers, healing centers, whatever. So yeah, so as it stands, what is your understanding of the extent of what is protected with the personal use section? 2-part question. Second part, how are y'all going to please fight to make sure that what is protected by the personal use section actually protects the people and our sovereignty and our relationship, our capacity to choose and steward medicine in the community first?
I think it's a great opportunity to move into that, this next section, and we will answer your question with all of that.
And we'll be here for a little while for any other questions afterwards.
Yeah.
Power is a big thing. Power is the biggest thing for people who feel powerless. A lot of us feel powerless in this system, especially people of color. With this necessary amount, I'll give it to you, but this is going under the assumption that once this is up and running, that there's going to be a desire to hunt people down. If there is something major, somebody gets hurt, will the police look at that? Yeah, and then they're going to see however many amount of mushrooms, and they're going to ask, where's your community? Who are you looking at? And then, yeah, that is something that could go into, that could be a problem. It could definitely be a problem. However, this community, many in the community, are responsible. They've told us how responsible they are. This is why they want personal sovereignty. And if there is that education and that wisdom to take care of yourself, not draw attention to yourself, with the creation of the problem, what would be the need to hunt somebody down and go look at people that are growing mushrooms, unless it's a huge amount, it's attracting attention. This is my personal feeling of hurting people. People being hurt under the use of psychedelics, which is another thing that we're going to have to look at,
You know
protections for
that
that.
that's real.
That's a big thing. When there is not attention drawn to something, why are they gonna hunt you down when they can be hunting down other things? Things that are definitely still illegal. So
Why
that
they
is,
not black and brown people regularly?
well, that is where community needs to stand up. That is where we need to come together to be able to educate our community members to be safe, to be strong, to move into the places where there might be fuckery going on, to make sure that there isn't undue attention drawn to this. Because this is going to be a big thing. This is going to be a big change, a very big change. It's already a big change. I think that's one of the reasons why this is not being fought by some of the higher ups, is because they already know that this is here and this is being done. So in the personal use, when we're talking about necessary amounts, yeah, that can be arguable. That can definitely be arguable. We need to know what our arguments are. What is a necessary amount? What does a person consider a necessary amount? You know, how many pounds do you need to have? And for what reason? How much do you really anticipate growing and having stored that this is such a big concern? Be safe, be wise, and we can be in our sovereignty, because that is part of sovereignty. I can use this when I want and how I want. And I'm smart enough and strong enough and wise enough to be able to do that. It's why this was made illegal. No, you can't have this. You can't have this. You're not smart enough to govern yourself. Somebody's going to jump out a window, or somebody's going to fly a plane and crash it. People are going to be driving on this. That's the fear. But you all are medicine people. I'm just saying be wise. And let's work together on it, because there's gonna be a lot to address. It's an excellent question, but when we're talking about power dynamics, we have to find our power in solidarity, not in, not in hassling and attacking Veronica on Facebook and Instagram. You know, that doesn't help. That does not bring us together to be able to stand up and argue what a necessary amount is, to be able to show up in force. I gotta let this out, I'm sorry, but this landslide thing, I fought. And you know what? Community brought me this as a problem, and I fought. And did community show up to back me up in that fight? Mm-mm. I was by myself. Can you imagine the difference that I would have been able to make if I'd have had 100 of you at my back showing up at landslide office? But when I made a call for help, nobody was there. It was me. And then I was being held personally responsible for everything that landslide did. Personally responsible. When I didn't hire them, and I was doing absolutely everything I could have done. When I say I need your help to be the bridge, I need your help to be the bridge. So when things like this comes up, it's not even a question, because we have a massive community showing up and saying, nuh-uh, this is a necessary amount. Look at the size of this community, and then they can't say shit.
Just a heads up, we've got 15 minutes, we're gonna cover a couple more questions, or?
Yeah. It does have plan, let's go with Jeff.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be real honest here. I've been speaking with the campaign manager of the Natural Medicine Health Act, and all the questions that I have for her, very similar to the questions, Duffy, that you just asked. She keeps saying, like, that's something for implementation. That's not what we're doing. We're working on a campaign. That's what she keeps saying, right? And like, once the vote happens, the steering committee isn't gonna be here anymore. We will. We're gonna be stuck with this. That's not ideal. Of course it's not ideal. And this is why the fight for not wanting the approach here in the first place started. But we're here now. We're here now. And I believe that we are strong enough to have an impact on what implementation looks like if we start organizing now. She told me, she said, there's going to be this period after November where you can speak to the elected officials and you can start talking to them about what implementation will look like. If we don't do that, some other government body will come in and start dictating what implementation will look like. Where do we go to find out what good implementation looks like? We can look to Oregon, which we should. However, the difference with Oregon is that, well, we should be learning from the mistakes. Yeah. And the difference with Oregon is that Oregon only had the regulated access model. And so the way this initiative is written is that the regulated access model is gonna have laws that are put in place by DORA that are clearly written out by the advisory board. So the advisory board, there's number one. We can have an impact and be talking to Polis and other elected officials about who should be on the advisory board. I think people in this room should be on the advisory board. That's number one. Now, the advisory board and DORA are only allowed to make regulations on the section on the regulated access model. This initiative is 18 pages long. What does implementation look like for the rest of those 18 pages? It's not DORA that's going to write those. It's not the advisory board that writes those. It's somebody that comes up after the vote or before the vote and starts speaking to these elected officials and saying, hey, I'm gonna be your person on implementation. We are your people on implementation. And if that's something that I'm gonna do because it's something that I've been asked to do, I don't wanna do it, unless I have community supporting me. I really don't. I'm uninterested in that. The only reason why I'm doing this is to be a bridge to the people in both areas. You know, the people who are talking policy, the people who are doing research, the people in academics, and then the people on the ground that are actually having these experiences. Because I'm in both worlds. And so one of the things that I'd really like to do that I've been thinking about, and this isn't confirmed yet, is that I as an individual will be putting out a survey. I want to know, what do people want? Gather actual real-time data so that we can point to numbers. Because often Veronica and I are like on the steering committee and we're like, we have to, talk about personal use and we have to talk about indigenous heritage. And they're like, yeah, but we saw that doesn't poll well. And then we mentioned recently, has anybody in this room ever been polled? No. So I want to get a community awareness survey going. I want to know, what do we want? And then I can use that if I end up being in this position of power, talking to elected officials. I can say, here are my numbers. This is what people want. This is what people don't want. This is what we're going to do. And I can't do that alone. So I ask you, as an answer to your question, how are we going to fight? Like, I can only fight if I have y'all's support. As a community member, not as a person on the steering committee, not as a person who supports the NMHA, just as a community member, because I want us to succeed. I want us to benefit from this. I want people who have been using these medicines underground to be protected. Do I know how to do that? No, because I don't know everything. But the community together can help inform that. So
Y'all have people on the inside that love you and give a shit. Use us. And for the question of Dora messing with the personal use section, even in the blue book that's coming out, it specifically says that Dora cannot regulate the personal use section. It cannot. It's been an argument I've heard over and over and over again. Even the blue book says it. So even they get it. Dora can't have anything to do with the personal use section, which is why it's so important that we back each other up. We have two people here who give a shit in a position of power. Use us. Stop with the abuse.
Cool. Well, I know that there's going to be a lot of wanting to have discussions after this, and I know that I think at 9:00 they really kick us out of this space.
That's when the next event starts, so we want to get
Right.
people off for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I think this feels like a good place to end. I feel pretty complete in the things that I wanted to share here, and I know that there's so many questions, and I want to give this next 20 or there's a good amount of time, but we'll get kicked out of this space soon, and I want opportunity for us to have, I don't know, maybe we could do a couple audience questions. What are you thinking? We've still got a good amount of time. It's 35. And we'll be kicked out if we got 20 minutes.
Do you want to do from here or do you want to go through that? Or like be.
Do you guys want to have us answer questions from up here, or
What do
we
y'all
can sit
want?
out there and you guys can come talk to us? What do you want to do? Raise your hand if you want us to answer from up here. Okay.
Great. Okay, let's do it. Who has a question? Come on up. Oh, I'm just gonna go with her first, and then I'll go.
Good evening, ladies, and thank you for all your work. I have not been involved in this process, but I have been on the fringes, watching everything, and talking to people as much as I can about voting on it. My question is about the intersection of DORA and the personal use section as it relates to therapists who already hold licenses with DORA, and how you could imagine something happening on the personal use side, how DORA might impact or investigate, regulate, say, a therapist who's also providing personal use services. It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's what we need you for. Because, yeah, that is those,
You said you're a lawyer?
Oh, great.
okay, thank you, yes, please, that's what we need you for. You know, because yes, I do see that, the question of power dynamics that Duffy brought up. You know, yes, if the therapist over here, I'm following all the rules, I'm doing all the things right, and I am, you know, towing the line, and we got this guy over here that gets to be free and do what they want, then yeah, that can be a problem. And the challenge with that is there has to be accountability. There has to be safety and a recognition that not everybody is coming from a good place, and what are we gonna do about it?
What are we gonna do about it?
I think the question, was a question about like, if somebody is a licensed facilitator and then also wants to provide personal use, like services.
Sorry, misunderstood.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the other part that, how are we gonna fix the problem on the shelves and cracks and predators that are out there? So it's two.
I mean, all to be determined. And why we need to grow a plan, like create a plan around what implementation should look like. That's a question that's really unique. So a lot of times I've been looking at Oregon as to like how facilitators are being trained and like what that looks like, but they don't have this situation of personal use. And so that's new. You have no idea how that's gonna work. And so I imagine what we could do is like having somebody can offer psilocybin services under the regulated access model, and then they can still offer like this personal use with Ibogaine or DMT and mescaline underneath. And I wonder like what those laws are gonna look like, and the advisory board is gonna have a lot of those discussions. We'll have to determine those things.
It's gonna be a little messy.
It's gonna be messy, yeah.
So far, my understanding is that if you are a licensed therapist, you're practicing within the facilitator model, you are also having the same protections as everybody else has, practicing on the personal use side.
Well, I think it's the other way around. The question is, if somebody's practicing under the personal use section and something goes awry, and it's not under the regulated model, say it's with the NT or something else, what is their liability to DORA?
Right.
That's one.
That's a question that needs to be spoken of in the advisory board meetings.
Tara, will you write that one down?
Yeah,
We're good for now.
yeah, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
love to have further
Yeah,
dialogue.
get with us after, please.
Dean. Oh, wait, no, this person had a question first. Yeah.
Kind of touched on it with this last question, but yeah, just I guess like give a little background. I personally know what it's like to deal with DORA, to be a complainant on a DORA case. A little over a year ago, I was abused by a ketamine therapist. I was saying that out loud sounds just feels really weird. I know within DORA right now, there's just so little context for psychedelic therapy, how it can go wrong. So I guess if you guys wanted to, I guess I wanted to know how accusations are going to be treated going forward, both for advisory boards, for people who might be working on this within DORA. I'm not as read up on the bill or anything like that. And yeah, I guess what role survivors can have. I worry about the state of psychedelic therapy in Colorado. I know there's probably a lot of people in this room who know or are, affiliated with Naropa, and I'm sure there's some people who are fine, but I also hear a lot of things about that institution that really bothered me. And they scared me. And I guess I wanted to know how you guys plan to accountability.
Well, first of all, thank you for your vulnerability, for doing the work to heal. This is actually something that is close to me because I have experienced abuse, not under the medicine, but I have experienced abuse by people that I've trusted. So this one is a really big one for me. This is going to be something that I dig my heels in and hammer in, and more than likely, even though I really don't want to do the advisory board thing, I'm probably going to do the advisory board thing, and since I do have connections, I probably would be accepted. I can't say I will, but I would probably be accepted. And for some of the people that do know me, I can be a little bit of an asshole when something is really important and dig my heels in, and protection for the people using this medicine and the trusting facilitators and accountability for that is going to be one of my fires.
Again, I don't have an answer. I don't have all the answers. And this is why we need community, so that we can hear your story that you so bravely shared. And that we can take these things into consideration and have these conversations and decide, well, what should accountability look like? I've been on a lot of accountability boards that failed. It's really hard to figure out psychedelic accountability. So let's try and figure that out together locally. Thank you. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer.
Yet.
Yes. Yeah, come on up. Oh, do you have any other question?
I wanted to ask if you've done any research or consultation with physicians communities that do this traditionally. What kind of methods and things that they can work really well for developing things like that. But especially, I mean, for non-regulated models, I think a really good step would be to create positive, like, cultural like, practices, create positive, like, cultural bubble. I think in a way that'll be like that can help to create its own immunity against other things taking brain in terms of like unregulated psychedelic practice.
That's a good question. And yes, I have talked to quite a few different wisdom keepers, by quite a few different elders from quite a few different tribes. One of the things that hit me the most powerful is an elder told me that the customs that were made around these medicines were not developed for therapy. So there's going to have to be adaptation, because these were originally set up for people who were wanting to walk the spirit path, to connect with the higher beings and move through. And this is being used, and it's not a bad thing that it's being used for healing in this way, but these customs weren't set up for this type of therapy. So their suggestion was to bring in the awareness and some of it, but something new is going to have to be created to be able to mix the old wisdom and respect in with the new understanding where humans are in 2022. So that is work that is going to continue to be done. That is why in the measure it's an analysis of what's going on consistently. And there are people here who are passionate and who are going to hold that accountability and who are not going to be chased away. Like, we are going to be heard. We have been heard, and we're going to continue to be heard, even if we're screaming and kicking and hollering. In order to do that, we're going to be heard in these circles, and we are.
If we're enough numbers.
If we're enough numbers, and we can be on the same side.
Not if it's just me and V. Yeah. Dean and then Melanie.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the power question, Duffy, because power is a really interesting word, and there's the kind of top-down power over, and then there's like the competence power. So I think one thing that I think about when it comes to implementation is, what are the skills that are needed? Like, what are the particular skills and experiences that are actually like needed when it comes to the many layers of hierarchy? Because a problem that we always run into in capitalist society and its oppositional failures is reconciling hierarchy with decentralization. So when I think of how to reconcile those two things, it usually has to do with, well, we're all good at certain things, and some of us are better at certain things than others. And we're not all equally skilled, we're not all equally experienced, but oftentimes our skills and experiences are very unique. And when it comes to this ecosystem, what I think about with with the psychedelic ecosystem is we're not only passing new legislation. We're like creating a new political, spiritual, psychological common sense for our society. And we're trying to create a solid foundation, solid starting point for that. So when it comes to, so in the language, in the advisory board section, it specifies, I can't remember the details, but it specifies something like you need, roughly speaking, 7, kind of more grassroots community, really like connected to psychedelics oriented members, and then 7 more like medically oriented members who would refer to things like the DSM. And so you have these 2 kind of different common senses that we're attempting to integrate. But then we have many other layers of, opportunities that could like advise the advisory boards. So I'm thinking of organizations like Jazz mentioned earlier. What if we don't do it, someone else will, and that's always the case. And that's actually, in a way, it can be a pro-capitalist argument. And I'm not like making an argument for or against capitalism. I'm just saying that someone will be in the position of power no matter what. So my question, I think, is when it comes to like say advising the advisory board, I think organizations like the North Star Pledge, or just North Star, and then they've written the North Star Pledge, which for those of you who aren't familiar, it's basically this organization that's advising all of the giant companies in the psychedelic space on how to ethically function. So what are the different organizations that are needed in the implementation phase, and what do you think is like the general spectrum of skills that are needed? Because you have your friends and colleagues in the room right now, so it's like we're all good at different things. So what do we actually need? What organizations need to start? How can we most optimally work through the systems that are in place, rather than trying to completely create a new system, but how can we most optimally integrate with the systems that are in place, and what skills and experiences are needed for that?
Thank you for your question. I think I don't have the capacity right now on the stage to answer that question. I would love some time to really like think it through. I'm up here, been talking for a long time. I don't know, one thing I will say is that I'm working on a consulting firm to be the accountability team for North Star, for anybody who has signed the North Star Pledge. So you sign it, and then what? And then you can like work with us to really implement it. That's something that's currently in the works, but that's the only thing I could really think of to say in this moment. And I really want to get to know Annie's question. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. And I think that there's like, we should be working on that, and that can happen outside of this meeting here today.
And I believe that the people that are going to be on the advisory board, part of that criteria is they need to be plugged into their communities. They can't just be a therapist with experience in the medicine and knows about cultural wisdom, but they're in their own echo chamber. They're not plugged into community that community can be advising them about what to bring. Each and every one of those people on that advisory board needs to also be a bridge.
Yeah. So we're gonna get kicked out of this room in 5 minutes, so I really want to get Melanie's question.
Actually, wait, I have to close, but I can make it a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, are you sure? Yes, I'd like to propose posting them in the Facebook page and maybe someone responding them for anyone else that also may have a question. Sure. Okay, cool. That's okay.
So interest of the time, everyone. I apologize, Melanie. I can sense your curiosity and concern, like many others in the room. Please keep this discussion going. We not limit it to the finite time we have here in this room. We are on Facebook. Look up the Psychedelic Club of Denver. We're really active there and love keeping these discussions going with you. Please join me in thanking Jazz and Veronica for coming to the stage. I really appreciate you stepping into your role, facing all the criticism that you have, sharing your respective experiences, and bridging back to the community as you mentioned.
I'm really sorry, it's just, we haven't had any people of color ask one question, and I think it's really important that we hear that question. So if we could just take a couple more minutes.
Of course.
Oh, sure.
In that case, yes, hi, Melanie Rose Rogers, Nick. Would love to, on that note, as a woman of color, women of color, and thank you for your bravery today, this is a lot. And I'm in the campaign too, I'm the co-proponent behind 61, and so my question to you is, your equity provisions, who on the steering committee, who was involved in writing those? We know from cannabis that reduced fees on licensure and also low cost barrier to entry isn't enough for even medical cannabis for cannabis legalization licenses today. And when you have lawyers, the cannabis lawyers, writing the policy for Initiative 58, how is equity actually going to be honored? How are indigenous people that have been using this medicine for years going to fit into this regulated top-down model? Is what I really want to know. As a woman of color, as someone who's seen the cannabis legalization, when you say, we don't know what we don't know, I mean, we can look at cannabis to see for sure what regulation will do, what DORA has done to medical cannabis practitioners, even now, how the rolling back of medical cannabis is happening right now with legalization, adult use legalization in Colorado. So those are my biggest concerns. And so, yeah, who on the steering, who in the NMHA are people of color, who's standing up for equity? Thank you.
I am. She is.
Anyone else?
There are, and that's,
Curious.
we need to get more people from the steering committee to have visibility, because there are. Is it enough?
Not enough.
It's not enough. I can only do what I can do. Jazz can only do what she can do. It's not enough. I agree. That's why it's so important to get into the damn advisory board and fight for it, because my definition of equity is different than your definition, these people's definition, Dora's definition. We have to be able to come to some consensus of what this is.
I don't know enough about it, for sure. And I'm on the steering committee. I don't know. So let's have that conversation.
And continue the
Let's
conversation. with a
honor
solution.
the space that has been given to us, and let's try and get out of here real quick. We love the Mercury Cafe. I've been coming here forever.
Thank you, Mercury.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You're fine. It's so hard to get everything in.